It was almost 1945, yet the promise of victory in Europe remained suspended in an Arctic chill. On the Western Front, the unexpected silence of the dawn on December 16th was shattered by the roar of the Wehrmacht's last desperate gamble. This was not a localized counterattack, it was a vast, crushing offensive, a lightning strike through the thinly held American lines in the frozen Ardennes forest that would soon be infamously known as the Battle of the Bulge. The question posed to the Allied High Command was one that defied military logic. What reaction could save the entire front when one was told to pivot a massive army attacking through the worst winter in 60 years, all within a span of just 72 hours? For most generals, the notion was simply impossible. Hitler's surprise attack, Operation Watch on the Rhine, had punched a huge chasm into the Allied defenses. German commanders were utterly confident, believing they had achieved complete strategic surprise against the supposedly overconfident Americans. 3 German armies, comprising 250,000 troops and 1,000 tanks, were charging westward through dense frozen forests with the crucial objective of seizing the vital port of Antwerp. The ultimate goal was to split the British and American forces and compel a negotiated peace. However, the German planners had failed to factor in one unpredictable element. Lieutenant General George S. Patton, Jr., born in 1885 into a family steeped in military tradition, Patton was 59 years old when fate called him to the Ardennes. His entire life had been a meticulous preparation for a moment when the destiny of nations might depend entirely on one man's ability to guide soldiers through the crucible of modern conflict. By December 1944, he led the powerful Third Army, a force of over 250,000 men and hundreds of armored vehicles. His reputation as the Allied forces' most aggressive panzer general was already firmly established. Patton's journey to this critical juncture had been marked by intense study and dramatic controversy. As a young officer, he had absorbed the lessons of history's greatest military minds, Alexander, Caesar, and Napoleon, firmly believing in his own destiny to command a great army in a desperate confrontation. His pioneering experience commanding the first American tank units in combat during World War I had drilled into him the decisive power of rapid offensive action and armored warfare. Yet, this brilliant military acumen was coupled with a volatile personality that almost ended his career prematurely. His leadership triumphs in North Africa and Sicily were shadowed by the infamous slapping incidents, where he struck 2 soldiers who were suffering from shell shock. This controversy sidelined him, keeping him out of the initial D-Day landings. However, his tactical genius and reputation for relentless aggression rendered him indispensable. The Germans themselves held a profound fear of him, so much so that he was made the centerpiece of an elaborate deception operation designed to convince the Wehrmacht that he was preparing an invasion of Calais rather than Normandy. Once the Third Army finally landed in France in July 1944, Patton proved he had learned to focus his aggressive instincts effectively. His forces accomplished a staggering feat after breaking out of Normandy, advancing 600 meters in only 4 months, liberating vast swathes of territory and capturing hundreds of thousands of German prisoners. However, the autumn brought periods of severe frustration. Stubborn German resistance and persistent supply shortages, particularly near places like Metz, had slowed the advance to a difficult crawl. Whispers began to circulate that Patton might only be a pursuit commander, highly effective when chasing an already defeated enemy, but less capable when facing determined, entrenched opposition. The coming battle in the winter of 1944 would silence those doubts permanently. The strategic moment arrived on December 19, 1944, when General Dwight Eisenhower convened an emergency meeting at Verdun. The situation was genuinely desperate. German forces had already driven 20 miles into Belgium, jeopardizing strategic crossroads and the crucial town of Bastogne. The First Army was in chaos, with entire divisions scattered or eliminated. If the German drive maintained its speed, the objective of reaching Antwerp and achieving strategic success was dangerously plausible. When Eisenhower sought an assessment of how quickly the Third Army could be turned north to launch a counterattack, Patton's response left every other commander present in stunned silence. While his peers were still grappling with the sheer scope of the German breakthrough, Patton was already 3 crucial steps ahead. Unknown to the others in the room, he had anticipated the possibility of a German thrust. His intelligence staff had detected unusual German activity, prompting the preparation of 3 distinct contingency plans for a northward pivot. This anticipation defined his genius. He did not merely react to unfolding events. He preempted them. He viewed the German offensive not as a crisis, but as an unmatched opportunity. Patton's resulting proposal defied every established military convention. He offered to disengage 6 full divisions from active combat, wheel them 90 degrees, and march them over 100 miles through some of the most punishing winter weather in decades, all while rigorously maintaining their combat readiness. Moving an army while it is still in contact with the enemy is considered one of the most perilous maneuvers in warfare. Attempting it in the dead of winter over icy roads while preserving tactical surprise seemed to be beyond the realm of possibility. Patton was able to transform impossible logistics into a tangible strategy through the sheer force of superior preparation and leadership. His philosophy was distilled down to a few core tenets: attack, always attack. He operated on the belief that the enemy was inherently weaker than they appeared, and that rapid aggressive movement could negate almost any tactical disadvantage. This was not the result of reckless bravado, it was a calculated aggression, rooted in an intimate understanding of his opponent's limitations. General Patton immediately recognized the fatal flaw inherent in the German strategy. Hitler's plan demanded absolute precision and perfect execution. The attacking German forces possessed highly limited fuel supplies, sufficient only for approximately 6 days of operations, and were utterly dependent on capturing Allied fuel dumps to sustain their advance. They had to reach their objectives rapidly before Allied air power could intervene, and crucially, before American reinforcements could materialize. Any significant delay would guarantee the offensive's catastrophic failure. Patton's solution, though simple in concept, was breathtakingly complex in execution. Rather than attempting to halt the German thrust at its strongest point, he decided to strike the Wehrmacht where it was most fragile, at the base of the massive bulge they had created. His proposed 3-division assault would not only relieve the American garrison besieged in Bastogne, but would also threaten to isolate and sever the entire German spearhead. On December 19th, Patton departed the conference at Verdun and immediately activated his plan. He contacted his headquarters and issued a terse 2-word command: play ball. This code phrase instantly launched the predetermined operational orders that his staff had diligently prepared. Within mere hours, the mammoth logistical machine began to move. Over 133,000 Third Army vehicles commenced one of the most intricate military movements in recorded history. The 81st Infantry Division, the 26th Infantry Division, and the spearhead the 4th Armored Division started their march northward. They were followed by extensive support echelons transporting 62,000 tons of vital supplies. The conditions faced by these soldiers were indescribably brutal. This winter was the coldest in living memory across Europe, with temperatures consistently averaging a frigid -7 degrees Celsius. Heavy snowfall drastically reduced visibility, making movement treacherous. American forces were severely lacking in adequate winter clothing. Many soldiers had only thin wool coats and cotton field jackets to shield them from the severe Arctic-like temperatures. Weapons froze constantly and required ceaseless maintenance, and truck engines had to be started every half hour to prevent the oil from congealing into thick sludge. Patton, however, had prepared for this moment in ways that transcended mere logistical planning. He understood that winter combat was equally a contest of morale and material. While many other commanders sheltered in heated headquarters, Patton made it an absolute priority to be constantly visible to his fighting troops. He traveled relentlessly in an open jeep. His face often froze, but he maintained his daily rounds, ensuring that news of his presence quickly filtered through the ranks. The resulting psychological effect was immense. American soldiers, battling conditions that might have shattered lesser units, drew profound strength from the knowledge that old blood and guts was actively sharing their terrible ordeal. His words of encouragement and praise, such as, "Georgie says this is our finest hour," spread like wildfire through the Third Army's grapevine. This was not simply empty rhetoric. Patton genuinely believed his soldiers were capable of achieving the impossible, and that unwavering confidence became theirs. The reaction from the German High Command to Patton's rapid movement vividly demonstrated the true brilliance of his audacious strategy. General Erich Brandenberger, who commanded the German 7th Army facing Patton's sector, had fully expected an aggressive reaction from the enemy. He was intimately familiar with Patton's reputation for aggressive armored warfare and had previously acknowledged that Patton's operations closely adhered to the fundamental German conception of mobile warfare. Nevertheless, even Brandenberger was astonished by the sheer speed and pinpoint precision of the Third Army's northward wheel. German commanders had absolutely not anticipated that any Allied force could successfully execute such a highly complex maneuver under the paralyzing grip of winter conditions. The Wehrmacht's own catastrophic experiences in Russia had drilled into them how winter could completely paralyze even the most efficient military machine. They erroneously assumed that American forces, with their perceived dependence on comfort and elaborate logistics, would be even more susceptible to winter's debilitating effects. This profound miscalculation exposed a fundamental flaw in German strategic thinking in late 1944. They persistently underestimated American military effectiveness, viewing United States forces as materially rich but inherently lacking in tactical competence and fighting spirit. German General Gunther Blumenritt would later admit their high regard for Patton, calling him the most aggressive Panzer general of the Allies, and noting that his operations impressed them enormously, largely because he came closest to the German concept of the classical military commander. By December 1944, however, the Wehrmacht was a pale shadow of the conquering force that had swept across Europe in 1940. The German divisions attacking through the Ardennes were a desperate mix of elite units and hastily assembled formations filled with old men and teenagers. Many German soldiers were starving, not having eaten for days, and lacked sufficient winter equipment. Their vehicles were running on synthetic fuel, which performed exceptionally poorly in the severe cold, and their already stretched supply lines were rapidly approaching their breaking point. The confrontation that erupted around Bastogne became the defining test. It showcased the complete transformation of the American Army, evolving from the inexperienced troops who landed in North Africa in 1942 into a seasoned professional fighting force. The defense mounted by the 101st Airborne Division in Bastogne became legendary, solidified when German commanders demanded their surrender, and Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe famously responded with the single defiant word, "nuts." But it was Patton's relief operation that irrevocably changed a staunch defensive stand into a triumphant offensive. In the midst of a massive snowstorm on December 22, 1944, Patton's 3 divisions attacked. This assault came as a complete shock to the German forces, who had been certain that the weather would prevent any major Allied counteroffensive. Along a fierce 20-mile front, American infantry and tanks smashed into the exposed German flank, driving 7 miles into enemy positions on that very first day. The fighting was savage and relentless. American forces, driven by Patton's unrelenting demand for aggressive action, refused to yield ground even when faced with powerful German counterattacks. The 4th Armored Division, leading the spearhead toward Bastogne, battled some of the best remaining units in the German army. Battles raged across frozen fields, transforming them into graveyards of burning steel, where the formidable Panther and Tiger tanks clashed with American Shermans and tank destroyers. Patton, ever the believer in Providence, had instructed his chaplain, Colonel James Hugh O'Neill, to compose a special prayer for clear weather, allowing for crucial Allied air support. The prayer, which was distributed throughout the Third Army, humbly petitioned for divine intervention to restrain the immoderate rains and grant fair weather for battle. Miraculously, on December 23rd, the clouds dispersed and the skies cleared. Allied fighter-bombers descended upon the German positions with devastating effect, striking like avenging angels. The critical breakthrough occurred on December 26th, the day after Christmas. Elements of the 37th Tank Battalion of the 4th Armored Division, led by Lieutenant Charles Bogus, punched through the tenacious German defenses and successfully linked up with the beleaguered 101st Airborne in Bastogne. The resulting corridor was dangerously narrow, only 500 yards wide, but it achieved the objective of breaking the siege and opening the way for massive reinforcement of the American garrison. Yet, relieving Bastogne was merely the beginning for Patton. While other generals might have rested, Patton saw the broader strategic opportunity. The German offensive had fatally overextended their already strained forces, creating the ideal conditions for devastating counterattacks. The destruction of German forces in the Ardennes required 6 weeks of unforgiving winter combat. Soldiers fought in conditions that tested the limits of endurance. Foxholes were hacked from frozen earth, men clung to one another for warmth, and weapons jammed in the bitter cold. The snow, once pristine, became stained with the blood of thousands, a cruel reminder of the human cost of war. By January 16, 1945, American forces advancing from north and south linked up at Houffalize, erasing the German Bulge, what Hitler envisioned as his last great gamble to split the Allies and force peace collapsed into disaster. Germany suffered over 100,000 casualties, lost more than 700 tanks and 1,600 aircraft, and exhausted its final strategic reserves in a gamble that delivered nothing but defeat. Central to the Allied success was George Smith Patton. In just 72 hours, he redeployed 6 divisions across treacherous terrain without sacrificing combat readiness, an achievement still hailed as a logistical marvel. "Destiny sent for me in a hurry when things got tight," he wrote to his wife. "Perhaps God saved me for this effort." The Bulge proved Patton was more than an aggressive tank commander. He was a strategist who grasped that audacity and speed could transform desperation into victory. By January, German contempt for American fighting spirit had vanished, replaced by a grim recognition of their opponent's resolve. Could this remarkable display of calculated aggression, anticipation, and sheer willpower truly be taught in any military academy, or does the history of the Bulge suggest that true genius in command is an innate, singular quality reserved for those who see opportunity where others see only catastrophe?